Can a world champion completely lose his way in just 2 races? Is Ferrari doomed to repeat its history of failure just before the biggest change in modern Formula One? Today, what is happening in Qatar is not just a bad performance, it is a serious warning for 2025. The 2025 Qatar Grand Prix will be recorded in history not only as another race on the calendar, but as a turning point that starkly exposes the structural failures of one of the most emblematic teams in Formula One, Ferrari. What happened during sprint qualifying was more than just a bad session. It was an uncomfortable revelation for Maranello, a truth that for months had been attempted to be disguised with optimistic speeches, promises of redemption, and a bomb signing, such as that of Lewis Hamilton. However, the track spoke, and its verdict was unrelenting. In Qatar, that veil of illusion was completely torn. The combination between an erratic SF25 and a visibly disoriented team left Hamilton eliminated in the first qualifying phase, while his teammate Charles Leclerc, although also limited, managed to rescue some sporting dignity. But beyond the numerical result, what was truly alarming was the general feeling. Ferrari does not know how to fix its own mistakes, and Hamilton is beginning to understand that his choice could have been a monumental strategic error. The problem is not only technical, it is cultural. Qatar was the scene where it became evident that Ferrari not only has flaws in the aerodynamic design, in the setup, or in the management of the car under pressure. The problem is deeper. There is a collapse of identity, of leadership, of methodology. What was once sold as a new era is now crumbling as another failed era. The engineers fail to adapt the car to the needs of their star driver, and the star driver begins to show visible signs of frustration. This situation not only impacts the present. What happens today is the prelude to a disturbing future. 2026 will bring with it a radical change in the technical rules of Formula One, and if Ferrari does not manage to get back on its feet sooner, it will not only lose this season, it will compromise its long-term competitiveness. Qatar was not an isolated accident. It was a mirror, a brutal reflection of the deep shortcomings of a team that continues to promise to return to the top, but that each year sinks a little deeper into mediocrity disguised as hope. Lewis Hamilton's fall in Qatar cannot be explained solely as a bad day. What happened in the sprint classification is the result of a progressive accumulation of alarm signals that Ferrari did not know how to interpret in time. The elimination in SQ1, finishing in 18th place, is not a simple statistical fact. It is a historical anomaly for one of the most successful drivers of all time, and a direct symptom of a car that has completely lost its technical and conceptual direction. Hamilton had already been warning since free practice that the car was practically undrivable, but what happened in qualifying exceeded even his worst expectations. Even before the session began, the atmosphere around the Ferrari garage was tense. They had opted for a high aerodynamic load configuration with the intention of giving greater stability to the rear axle, one of the best-known weaknesses of the SF25. However, that decision turned into a technical trap that amplified all of the car's problems. From the first turns, Hamilton reported an alarming lack of grip in fast corners and, especially, unpredictable behavior in Sector 3. The car suddenly lost aerodynamic support, causing sudden slides that were impossible to correct without losing significant time or compromising vehicle control. On the radio, Hamilton's tone was one of resignation, a feeling he has rarely displayed publicly. When he uttered the blunt phrase, "the car can't go faster," he was acknowledging something that for a champion of his caliber is almost a personal defeat. No matter what he tried, the car simply lacked the potential necessary to compete on equal terms. That message did not speak of a piloting error, nor of a specific poor adjustment. He spoke of a structural limit, of a design concept that does not respond to the needs of either the driver or the circuit. Even more worrying was his body language after getting out of the car. There was no fight, there was no prolonged technical discussion, there was no classic Hamilton insistence on understanding every detail. There was only silence. That same silence was carried over to the interviews, where he limited himself to responding with short, almost automatic phrases. When asked what was wrong, he simply replied, "Same old thing." And when trying to find something positive, he just said, "The weather is nice." These responses are not typical of a competitive driver. They are typical of someone who begins to emotionally disconnect from a project that offers no guarantees. The most striking thing is how his performance contrasts with that of Charles Leclerc. While Hamilton was eliminated, Leclerc managed to advance with a difference of 4/10 in SQ1 in the same car with the same aerodynamic package and the same track conditions. This shows that the SF-25, with all its limitations, does have an operational range that can be accessed, but Hamilton for some reason cannot enter it. The gap between both drivers has become a repeated pattern, reflecting that the Briton has failed to adapt his driving style to the behavior of the car, while Ferrari has failed to adapt the car to his style, creating a vicious circle that harms both parties. It is especially striking that Hamilton, known for his ability to find solutions even in adverse situations, finds his hands completely tied. Unlike his years at Mercedes, where he always found some alternative way to compensate for deficiencies, at Ferrari, he does not have the tools or the technical feedback necessary to transform his feelings into real improvements. The engineers seem trapped in an inertia of constant experimentation without clear direction, and the team's most valuable driver is sinking into that same disorganization. What happened in Qatar is therefore not a simple bad performance. It is the portrait of a champion trapped in a frustrating car, in a team that cannot find answers, and in a dynamic that threatens to worsen if a drastic decision is not made. Ferrari cannot afford to lose Hamilton either on track or in spirit. But each ranking like this further erodes your motivation, your confidence, and your ability to lead the project. And that is perhaps the most dangerous consequence of all. The Qatar Sprint Qualifying not only exposed Ferrari's mechanical and strategic problems, but also accentuated an increasingly uncomfortable narrative within the team, the growing performance gap between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. At first glance, they both drive the same car, but the way in which each person relates to that car says much more than the results that appear in the table. Leclerc qualified 9th. It was not a brilliant performance, but it was efficient. While Hamilton was left out in SQ1 with a time that was far from being competitive, the Monegasque managed to extract some performance from the same SF-25 that his teammate described as impossible to drive. On the same track, under the same conditions, with similar configurations, the difference between the two was 0.4 of a second. In Formula One, that difference is abysmal. But the most worrying thing is not the time itself, but what it represents. Hamilton's systematic inability to access that small margin of performance available in a car with very defined limits. The solution that Ferrari tried to apply to Hamilton's car was to install a high-load package, seeking a more stable balance at the rear. But the result was quite the opposite. The modification increased drag without significantly improving stability, and what was achieved was a car that was slower on the straight and still unstable in curves. The situation worsened in Sector 3 of the circuit, where Hamilton suffered a sudden loss of rear grip that forced him to abort his fastest lap. This phenomenon was not isolated. It was the tangible expression of a car poorly balanced from its aerodynamic conception. These types of problems are not corrected with a spoiler change or a specific update. Here we are talking about a platform with an unstable center of pressure, a poorly managed mass distribution, and an aerodynamic flow that breaks under lateral loading. The Maranello engineers know this, but they have not found an efficient way to correct it. And the most alarming thing, every time they try, as with the new specifications introduced for this weekend, they end up generating side effects that further affect the overall behavior of the car. The technical becomes political in these scenarios. Because when the simulator data promises a profit, but the real car reacts in the opposite way, internal confidence is eroded. Pilots stop trusting the feedback they receive. Engineers are forced to improvise on the fly. And the team enters a constant trial and error loop where each session becomes a laboratory without concrete results. Qatar was more than just a bad result. It was a wake-up call, a brutal reflection of the exact moment when an ambitious project begins to fall apart from within. Ferrari did not reach this point because of an isolated accident or bad luck. It did so due to a series of wrong decisions, due to the repetition of past errors that continue to emerge with new names and new faces, but with the same root, the lack of a clear, coherent, and sustained vision over time. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.